welcome to the deep dive. So, you know that feeling when you're trying to follow the news about the global economy?
Oh, yeah.
And it just sounds like this confusing mess of political arguments, jargon, and honestly, a lot of panic.
It's almost designed to be confusing.
Today, we're doing something different. We're opening up the engine, pulling back the hood, and looking at the whole thing purely as a machine.
That's exactly right. Our mission in this deep dive is to shortcut all that noise by analyzing the economy, not through ideology, but through systematic institutional analysis.
And for this, you've pulled from some pretty heavy hitters.
We've got material from the IMF, the World Bank, the OECD, and the Bank for International Settlements, the BIS.
Okay.
And they all, in their own way, describe the economy as a mechanical system. It's just a set of interacting forces.
So the goal isn't to figure out who's right or wrong in a political debate. It's to understand how the gears actually turn.
Exactly. The OECD's economic outlook shows this again and again. The outcomes we see, booms, busts, they emerge from these mechanical forces and, behavioral incentives.
Regardless of who is in power.
Precisely. And once you grasp this sort of closed-loop system, you really have the foundation to analyze almost everything you read about in the news.
Okay, let's get into it. If the economy is a machine, what are the primary gears? What are the core parts that are always moving?
You can, I think, boil it all down to 5 core variables. Just 5.
That's manageable.
It is. You have income and spending. That's the basic flow. Then you have debt and credit, which act as the accelerator and the brake.
Okay.
And finally, the one that really matters for the long term, the sustainable driver, productivity. The whole economic story is just the continuous feedback loop between those 5 things.
Let's start with that base layer then, income and spending. That seems like the most intuitive part.
It is. Income is basically the purchasing power you get from productive activity, from your job, from an investment, from creating something of value.
And spending is the other side of that coin.
It's the demand side. The relationship is circular. Your spending literally becomes someone else's income.
So if spending is low, the system slows down. If it's high, it speeds up.
Right. But the real tension, the drama that comes in when we introduce the next pair of variables.
Debt and credit. We all understand debt, but how does credit work in this mechanical model?
Well, the BIS annual report has a great definition. It defines credit not just as money, but as a claim on future income.
A claim on future income.
It's a mechanism, really. It lets you transfer purchasing power from the future into the present. It's the only way that total spending in the economy can temporarily exceed the total current income.
It's like using next month's paycheck to buy something today.
Exactly. And that word temporary is doing a lot of work there.
Right, because if you borrow from the future, you eventually have to pay it back, which means spending less later on.
It has to balance out.
So if credit is just moving purchasing power around in time, what actually creates new wealth? How does the pie get bigger?
And that brings us to the 5th, and I would argue the most critical variable. Productivity.
The long-term driver.
Yes, the World Bank is just crystal clear on this. Productivity is the fundamental driver of our living standards. It's defined simply as output per unit of input. How efficient are we at converting resources, labor, and capital into actual goods and services?
And that's the great dividing line, isn't it? Productivity is the only sustainable source of long-term growth. Everything else is just
shifting things around. Shifting existing wealth or just pulling future demand into the present.
Right. I think the IMF has this insight that it stresses over and over again.
It does. That money itself does not create wealth.
That feels counterintuitive to a lot of people.
It does, but think it through. If a central bank just doubled the amount of money in everyone's account tomorrow, but the number of cars, houses, and services stayed the same, what would happen?
We wouldn't all be twice as rich. Prices would just double.
Exactly. You get inflation. It just redistributes the existing wealth. It doesn't create new, real purchasing power. For that, you need real, tangible output gains. Right. That only comes from productivity.
Okay, so if productivity is the long, slow climb, where does all the short-term drama come from, all the cycles we see in the headlines?
That takes us to what we can call Engine 1, credit creation. This is the source of most of the volatility. The IMF calls credit both a smoothing mechanism,
And an amplification device.
And then amplification is the key. Credit creates these incredibly powerful demand cycles. And to understand why they're so powerful, you have to grasp a core mechanism that the BIS highlights.
Which is?
That financial institutions create credit by extending loans, and in doing so, they simultaneously create deposits.
Okay, hang on. Let's slow down on that because that breaks a lot of mental models. You're saying banks don't primarily lend out money that other people have already saved.
That is the crucial finding. When you get a mortgage, the bank doesn't open a vault full of savings. They just expand their own balance sheet. They create a new deposit entry in your name out of thin air.
So the main constraint isn't how many deposits they have.
No. The constraint is the bank's own capital requirements and, of course, the creditworthiness of the borrower. This ability to create credit is what makes the cycle so potent.
That sounds like a perpetual motion machine, at least for a while. This ability to instantly create purchasing power must accelerate everything.
It does. It's called leverage.
Yeah.
And the BIS analysis details this self-reinforcing positive feedback loop.
What does that boom cycle look like?
Well, credit expands, so spending grows. That spending fuels corporate revenues and starts to drive up asset prices, houses, stocks, you name it.
And higher asset prices mean people feel wealthier.
And more importantly, borrowers now have more valuable collateral that makes them look less risky to lenders.
Which enables even more credit growth.
You've got it. It's a virtuous cycle of optimism and leverage. The system starts accelerating far beyond what the underlying productivity growth could ever support on its own.
It's the economic equivalent of driving downhill with the wind at your back.
A perfect analogy.
Mm-hmm.
But that same self-reinforcing cycle operates with equal and often devastating force in reverse.
The reversal.
Yes. The moment confidence wavers or debt payments become a problem, that cycle flips.
So falling asset prices.
They reduce collateral values. That shrinks the base for any future lending. At the same time, declining income makes it harder for people to pay their existing debts.
And lenders get scared.
They withdraw liquidity. Risk premia, the extra cost you pay for a loan because of perceived risk, they skyrocket. The IMF consistently shows that these credit-fueled booms inevitably create the exact conditions for the subsequent bust. It requires a painful cleanup, either through deleveraging or defaults.
So that short-term volatility is a constant feature. But if we pull back, that doesn't change the underlying reality, does it? That sustainable wealth has to come from somewhere else.
It has to. And that takes us to engine 2, productivity. The long-term trajectory.
The long game.
The entire long game is about productivity. The World Bank really emphasizes this. Any sustained increase in our living standards has to come from efficiency gains. It's about learning to produce more with the same or less effort.
And the sources point to three main drivers for that. The first one is the most obvious one: technology and innovation.
That's the spark plug for the engine. Technology just introduces new ways of doing things, better products, better ways to organize ourselves. And these aren't just one-off gains. They accumulate. They compound over decades.
Like the jump from the telegraph to fiber optics.
A perfect example, a massive leap in output efficiency per unit of input.
Okay, the second driver is capital accumulation. Now that sounds like just buying more machines.
It is, but the World Bank expands that definition. It includes physical capital, sure, but also human capital and, critically, institutional capital.
Human capital being skills, education.
Exactly. You need smart, trained people to actually operate and adapt to new technologies. But institutional capital, that's where the deep structure of the economy comes in. This is things like governance, contract enforcement, property rights.
What does that mean in practical terms for a country?
It means predictability. It means trust. If you invent something new, do you have confidence the courts will protect your patent?
Right.
If you invest millions in a new factory, do you trust that the government won't just arbitrarily seize it? Strong institutions, high institutional capital. They ensure that money gets channeled toward productive, wealth-creating uses instead of being, siphoned off or just hidden overseas.
And we should probably mention, as the OECD points out, this growth doesn't happen evenly across the whole economy.
Not at all. That's a key point. It's very uneven. Some sectors adopt new tech quickly, others lag behind, and that creates these necessary but often painful adjustment challenges as resources, and people have to shift from less efficient sectors to the more innovative ones.
So let's try to connect the two engines now. We have this long upward trend of productivity, and then the wild short-term swings of the credit cycle. How do they link up in the system?
They link through really powerful positive feedback loops, and the main channel is asset prices.
Okay.
The BIS analysis shows this clearly. Rising asset prices make people feel wealthy, so they consume more. It improves the balance sheets of companies and households, and it expands that collateral base we talked about,
Which then fuels the credit cycle.
which then fuels the credit cycle, which then feeds back to push asset prices even higher. It's a loop.
And what's so fascinating is how much of this is driven by pure psychology. It's not just numbers on a spreadsheet.
No, it's deeply behavioral. The IMF calls it procyclical risk perceptions.
What does that mean?
It means that during a boom, you see very few companies or people defaulting on their loans. Things look stable, and that stability actually reduces how much risk people think exists.
So the good times make us less cautious.
Exactly. People start to believe the good times will last forever. And that behavioral shift encourages excessive risk-taking. Lenders get hungry for higher returns, leverage increases, and the whole boom gets amplified because nobody is being prudent anymore.
And this is how the system just routinely overshoots a sustainable level.
The overshoot is almost baked in. It's inherent to momentum. The IMF framework explains that everyone just extrapolates from recent performance. They ignore the warning signs because, this time is different.
By famous last words.
Always. They push the system past its sustainable limit, and that creates the momentum for a contraction that, because of that reversal of confidence, also tends to overshoot on the way down. A deeper recession then was necessary.
This self-reinforcing dynamic seems to lead to some predictable failure modes then. What are the key systemic risks the BIS report always flags?
The first and most obvious is just excess leverage. At some point, that debt service, the monthly payment, it just starts to consume an ever-increasing share of income. The system reaches a point where it simply has to adjust. Through painful income compression, debt restructuring, or just outright default, the debt burden becomes too heavy for the underlying income to carry.
And then there's a problem that policy itself can create. Moral hazard.
Yes, moral hazard. This is the risk that if banks and other institutions expect to be bailed out, if they expect a government safety net, they are actively incentivized to take on excessive, imprudent risks.
They get the upside during the boom.
They privatize the gains, and then they socialize the losses during the bust. That expectation just poisons the whole system of checks and balances.
And incredibly, you're saying that even regulation can sometimes make things worse.
It sounds counterintuitive, but yes. The IMF points out that often regulation is based on current risk assessments. So when the economy is booming and perceived risk is low, capital requirements for banks become less binding. They're told to hold less capital.
Just when they probably should be holding more.
And then when the bust hits and risk is high, the regulations become more binding, forcing banks to pull back lending precisely when the economy needs it most. So regulation can become procyclical. It can amplify the very volatility it's meant to smooth out.
Wow. So given all these powerful mechanical and behavioral forces, what can policymakers actually do? The OECD seems pretty clear that governments can affect incentives, but they can't just override these fundamental relationships.
They can't. They can interact with the engine. For central banks, the main tool is monetary policy influencing the cost of credit through interest rates.
Encouraging or discouraging borrowing?
Right. But the OECD is also clear. Cheap credit can stimulate spending for a while, but it cannot create sustainable income growth without the underlying productivity gains.
And on the other side, you have fiscal policy, government spending and taxes.
Which is vital for smoothing cycles, for offsetting those big swings in private demand during a downturn. But, as the IMF always emphasizes, it operates within hard constraints.
Debt sustainability.
Exactly. It can't permanently substitute for private demand. Too much government debt just raises borrowing costs for everyone and crowds out future private investment.
It sounds like effective policy is just this constant battle against time and perception.
It absolutely is. Effectiveness really hinges on two things: timing and credibility. If the policy response is delayed, the imbalances, the excess leverage, the overshooting, they just grow too large for a gentle correction.
And credibility.
Credibility is everything. If people in the private sector don't believe the policy commitments, if they doubt a central bank's promise to fight inflation, for instance, then the policy loses its power. People just act on their fears instead.
And the final limitation, which the BIS notes, is maybe the most sobering of all.
It is. Policy can't eliminate the economic cycle. It can only hope to affect its amplitude and frequency.
And if they get too good at it.
There's a risk. If policy stabilization is too successful, it can inadvertently encourage even more private sector risk-taking because everyone starts to see that safety net as permanent. And that just feeds the moral hazard loop all over again.
It all comes back to the machine. The essential takeaway, and it's reinforced across all these reports we've looked at, is that economic performance really reflects these systematic mechanical forces. It's the interplay of credit, assets, and productivity.
Mhm.
It's not just about ideological debates or policy intentions.
Understanding that framework gives you an objective lens to see through the noise.
Yeah.
But it also raises a really important question for you to think about, one that builds on everything we've unpacked. If the core economic engine requires productivity for any sustainable increase in our living standards, and credit cycles really just shift existing claims on wealth around, how should we fundamentally redefine, or at least critically assess, what wealth creation means when we look at something like GDP statistics? Especially given that, as all these sources show, our own procyclical risk perceptions and the lag in data make it incredibly difficult to identify what's truly sustainable in real time.
Something to mull over until our next deep dive.